I stand at the edge of the grove as the first light of dawn brushes the horizon with the gentlest hue of gold. The world is still caught in that quiet breath between night and day, when time itself seems to hold still, pausing in reverence for the birth of morning. The air is crisp, a delicate hush wrapping the landscape in its arms. I can feel the breath of the earth rising to meet me, moist and cool, whispering through the blades of grass beneath my feet, lifting tendrils of mist that curl around my ankles like silk spun from stillness. My robes grow heavy with dew, each drop a silent blessing, a soft reminder that I am part of something vast and breathing. Around me, the trees stand like sentinels, ancient and patient, stretching their limbs to the heavens without effort or strain, their bark furrowed like the skin of time itself. In this moment, I am not a poet, not a scholar, not a teacher. I am simply another soul, barefoot against the earth, listening to the sacred language spoken in silence. There is something about the edge of dawn that strips away all masks. Here, I do not need to prove myself, not to others, not even to myself. I simply exist, suspended in the grace of now. It is in this liminal space, between darkness and light, sleep and waking, that I hear most clearly the teachings the trees have long offered me. They have stood here for lifetimes, weathering seasons, storms, and centuries. Yet they are not burdened by their past. They do not carry shame for the limbs they've lost, nor fear the brittle branches that will someday fall. They remember only what matters, to grow, to endure, to let go. I used to believe strength was measured by how tightly one could hold on to ideas, to people, to dreams even when they had long since withered. I thought loyalty meant never releasing, that love required clinging, that faith demanded unwavering grip. But I have come to see how mistaken I was. There is a different kind of strength, quieter and less admired, yet infinitely more powerful, the strength to release. The strength to trust in the cycles of life, to bow to change as a sacred guest, to let what is dead fall away so the living may thrive. When I was younger, I feared change. I feared the ache of absence, the hollowness that followed loss. I remember the first time I let go of a beloved friend whose presence had become a shadow. I clutched that friendship like a dying leaf, afraid that in releasing it, I would lose part of myself. But over time, I learned what the trees knew all along, that it is in the letting go that we are made whole. The leaves fall, not because the tree no longer values them, but because their time has passed. To cling to what has served its purpose is to hinder the growth that longs to emerge. This morning, as I stand beneath the canopy, I watch a single leaf twist in the soft wind, pale and fragile, barely tethered to its branch. It quivers, not with fear, but with readiness. There is no resistance, only rhythm. The wind calls it downward, the earth opens to receive it, and the tree offers no protest. I marvel at this simple surrender, this quiet act of faith. That leaf does not question its fall, nor does it mourn the branch. It trusts that its descent is part of a greater unfolding, one it cannot see but fully belongs to. I inhale deeply, letting the cool air fill my chest. It carries the scent of damp bark, of roots and rain, of the past returning to the soil. I close my eyes and feel a stirring in my own spirit, a knowing that I too must release. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to feel light again. Enough to make space within me for something new to take root. Perhaps it is an old sorrow I have carried too long, or a belief that no longer serves my becoming. Perhaps it is a fear masquerading as protection. Whatever it is, I name it silently, and then, ever so gently, I let it go. The wind rises, brushing my face like the palm of a loving hand, and in its caress I hear the echo of the ancient teaching I have heard again and again from these steadfast companions. Be like a tree and let the dead leaves drop. Not out of despair, not because of bitterness or defeat, but because life demands it. Because there is no flowering without first an emptying. Because holding on to what is no longer alive within us is not love, it is longing. And longing, beautiful though it may be, must eventually give way to presence. So I stand here, at the edge of this sacred grove, and I surrender. not as a sign of weakness, but as an act of trust. I trust the unseen pattern, the hidden symmetry of existence. I trust that in letting go, I do not diminish, but deepen. The trees shed with such grace, such effortless wisdom. And I, their listening student, vow once more to learn their way. To be like them. To be unafraid. To be willing to lose what I must in order to become who I truly am. There are mornings when memory comes not as a thought, but as a sensation, an ache behind the ribs, a tightening in the throat, a weight in the limbs that even sleep could not lift. Today is such a morning. The grove is quiet, as always, but something within me stirs noisily, clattering through the corridors of the past, dragging with it the rusted chains of things I once believed were part of me. I walk the familiar trail, worn by years of passing, and I find myself once again before the willow by the stream. Her branches dip low, trailing the water with a tenderness I envy. She has always been there, faithful, unchanging in her changing, and her presence calms the unrest within me. I settle beneath her, and as I do, the memories come, soft at first, then insistent. There was a time, not far from here, and yet lifetimes away, when I believed that to be human was to preserve. I believed that the self was a tapestry woven of memory, and that every thread must be guarded fiercely, lest the entire pattern unravel. I wore my past like a heavy cloak, believing it was my identity, my proof that I had lived, that I had loved. Every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of joy, I carried them all, even when they began to fray and decay inside me. I thought that was devotion. I thought it was sacred to hold on. But the more I carried, the heavier I became, until I could no longer tell where I ended and my burdens began. There was a man I once loved with the quiet fury of a flame that forgets how to flicker and burns instead without pause. He arrived in my life like rain after drought, like song after silence. His presence was a kind of answer, though I had not yet formed the question. With him, everything was heightened, the laughter, the pain, the longing. I built stories around him, futures carved in glass, every detail of our time together etched into the walls of my memory as if I feared forgetting would erase the love itself. When he left, it was not sudden. It was worse, it was slow. He withdrew like the sea, tide by tide, leaving behind shells in silence, and I, stubborn as a stone, remained where I was, convinced that if I stayed still enough, if I held tight enough, the waves would return. They never did. And so I wandered, carrying his absence like a relic. I spoke his name in poems. I lit candles for his ghost. I refused to let his leaf fall from the branch of my heart, even as it shriveled and darkened with time. I convinced myself that to release him was to betray the love, to declare it meaningless. But the tree, the willow, she watched it all. Season after season, she let her leaves drop. Some were lush, green with memory, others already brittle and brown. She let them all fall. She made no distinction between the beautiful and the broken. She did not ask the leaf to stay, nor did she curse it for leaving. She simply let go. It took me years to understand what she was showing me. I had always viewed letting go as an ending, a kind of death. But she revealed a different truth, that surrender is not an act of despair, but of trust. Trust in the rhythm of life. Trust that what falls will feed the earth. Trust that emptiness is not lack, but space. Space for something new to grow. When the willow dropped her leaves, she did not become less. She became ready. Ready for winter's stillness, for spring's blossoming. She honored the leaf by letting it complete its journey. And so must we. I remember the night I finally allowed myself to feel the absence fully, not just its pain, but its purpose. I walked here, beneath this very tree, and I spoke aloud the words I had held in silence for so long. I release you. My voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the effort of undoing a knot I had spent years tightening. I felt ridiculous at first, speaking into the wind, as though the grove could hear. But it did. The The trees do not respond in language, but in presence. The willow rustled slightly, and a single leaf drifted down, landing near my feet. I picked it up, cradled it in my palm, and wept. Not because I was losing him again, but because I was finally returning to myself. The days that followed were not without pain. Letting go is not a single moment, but a practice. A slow unfurling, a continual loosening. I found pieces of him everywhere, in songs, in faces, in forgotten lines of poetry, and each time I breathed deeply and released again. The leaf falls, not in a dramatic flourish, but gently, quietly, as it was always meant to. And the tree does not mourn the fall, it continues to reach for light. Now, when I look back, I do not see a wound. I see a season, a necessary chapter. A time that taught me how to love, how to feel deeply, and how to survive when the story ended before I was ready. And just as autumn makes no apology for its fading, neither do I. I no longer fear the letting go. I no longer believe that what falls away takes something essential with it. What is meant to remain will take root. What must leave will become the soil for what is to come. As I sit beneath the willow now, years older and, perhaps, just a little wiser, I see that the trees have always been the truest teachers. They ask nothing, yet offer everything. They show us how to endure with grace, how to bend without breaking, and most importantly, how to release. There is a sacred humility in that act, a recognition that life is not ours to hold forever. That to live fully is to participate in the ebb and flow, to be shaped by loss, yes, but not defined by it. I touch the bark of the willow and whisper my thanks. To her, to the man who once held my heart, to the version of myself who clung because she didn't yet know how to trust the wind. I gather the fallen leaves around me and feel no sorrow, only reverence. They are no longer burdens. They are offerings. And I, too, am learning to fall with grace, to rise with purpose, to release with love. Be like a tree and let the dead leaves drop. I do not just understand it now. I live it. There are moments that seem insignificant when they arrive, but become doorways to transformation in hindsight. That day, the one where I watched the single yellowing leaf trembling on the edge of surrender, was one of those moments. Nothing grand or thunderous marked its unfolding, no dramatic gesture from the skies, no voice echoing from within, but something deep inside me recognized the sacredness of what was happening. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, yet it reached into the quiet hollows of my spirit like the soft press of a hand upon the chest. I had wandered into the grove that afternoon seeking nothing in particular, perhaps to breathe, to escape the noise of the town and the expectations of those who looked to me for words and wisdom. But as I stood beneath that old tree, something greater than understanding began to stir in me. A kind of remembering, a kind of return. The tree itself was old, worn but regal, its bark split with age and its canopy dense yet thinning at the edges with the early signs of autumn. All around me, the forest was preparing to let go. Leaves shifted in their hues, rich greens blushing into ambers, oranges, and the first hints of crimson. The air held the first trace of coolness, that almost imperceptible crispness that speaks of endings and beginnings all at once. And there, on one branch not far above my line of sight, was a single leaf, pale gold and curling slightly at the tips, clinging to its place on the limb with a stillness that drew my gaze like a whisper draws attention in a room full of noise. It was the quietest thing I had seen in days, and yet it felt loud in its stillness. I stood motionless, letting my breath slow, and watched it. Something about the way it moved, not with resistance, but with readiness, began to open something in me. It didn't thrash or twist against the wind. It swayed. It yielded, as if it had made peace with the inevitable and now waited only for the precise breath of wind that would carry it back to the earth. I imagined what it must be like to have served your purpose, to have soaked in the sun, offered shade, breathed out the air for others to breathe in, and then, with quiet dignity, to fall. To return. Not in defeat, but in completion. That image pierced through the noise of my inner clinging. For so long I had been holding on to ideas, identities, attachments, some vibrant, others long faded. I carried within me conversations I should have released, mistakes I had already paid for, stories that no longer served my unfolding but had become so deeply intertwined with my sense of self that I feared without them I would be hollow. I held tightly to my roles, to the image others had of me, to the image I had carefully crafted of myself. There were even moments of joy I clung to too tightly, desperate to preserve them, fearful that if I let go, they would dissolve completely, as if memory alone could not hold their shape. But I was learning, painfully, slowly, that clinging comes not from love, but from fear. And fear, I was beginning to see, is a poor steward for the soul. As I stood there watching that single leaf, I realized I had confused endurance with preservation. The trees endure not because they resist change, but because they embrace it so completely. They are, in every moment, in relationship with the wind, with time, with decay and rebirth. They do not mourn the falling of their leaves because they understand that letting go is a kind of offering. Each leaf, as it falls, becomes food for the soil. It feeds the roots, which in turn nourish the tree again. There is a circularity to it, a holy logic that asks nothing more than trust in the turning of seasons. Why had I not allowed myself to follow the same rhythm? Why had I clutched the dying things in my life as if my survival depended on them, rather than trusting the wisdom of release? I reached up, not to take the leaf, but simply to stretch my hand toward it, feeling its energy, its softness. I imagined my own burdens, old pain, unspoken truths, the tight armor I wore to keep my heart protected, resting on my open palm, just as fragile. And for a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined what it would feel like to let them fall, one by one, to the ground. Not with violence, not with rejection, but with reverence. Like laying down stones after a long journey. Like returning offerings to the earth that had always known how to hold what I could no longer carry. There was no epiphany, no instant transformation, but something quiet happened inside me, a tender loosening. I felt my breath expand just a little more freely in my chest. I felt the muscles behind my eyes relax. I felt the weight in my stomach lift, as if some hidden grief had finally exhaled. I began to walk again, through the grove, but slower now. Not in search of something, but in communion with what already was. Every leaf I saw fluttering down from the trees seemed to greet me with the same message: it's okay to release. It's okay to let it go. That evening, as dusk fell and the world softened into shadow, I sat beside a fire and thought of all the things I had feared to let fall, the love I had lost and never mourned fully, the old stories I had written about myself, the voices I had tried so long to please. I saw them not as curses or wounds, but as leaves, beautiful and necessary in their time, but ready now to descend. I whispered my gratitude to them, then offered them to the flames, one by one, in silence. Since then, I have learned to watch the leaves more carefully. Each one is a teacher. Each one reminds me that I do not need to hold everything forever. That growth requires release. That becoming who I am meant to be will always involve letting go of who I once was. And that there is no shame in the fall, only grace. The leaf did eventually fall, though I did not see it happen. I like to believe that it drifted to the ground softly, without resistance, without sorrow. And when it did, it became part of something greater than itself. It returned to the roots. And in that return, it began again. So it is with us. Let the dead leaves drop. Not because they were unworthy, but because their season has passed. And what waits beneath, still hidden, still gathering strength, is the next green shoot of life, rising to meet the light. There is something profoundly humbling about being surrounded by a forest in the throes of autumn. The very air tastes different, earthier, more grounded, as if the season itself is exhaling, releasing all it has carried through the bright months of growth. The sunlight, no longer sharp or urgent, arrives now like a blessing, soft and low, stretching its golden fingers across the trees with a kind of reverence. Every step I take on the forest floor is a conversation with the past. The leaves crunch softly beneath my feet, each one a memory, each one once held tightly to a branch that had to let it go. I walk without destination, carried by instinct more than intention, my feet knowing the path even if my mind wanders. The trees arch above me like ancient guardians, branches half-clothed, half-bare, their silhouettes etched against the sky in graceful surrender. And everywhere there is falling, leaves drifting down with slow, circling grace, not like something breaking, but like something becoming. I pause often to watch them descend, mesmerized by the silence of it all. It is not a silence of absence, but a silence full of presence, a holy stillness where something invisible is at work. The forest is not dying. It is preparing. It is trusting. As I move deeper into the grove, I realize how foreign this kind of trust has been to me. I have spent much of my life building, collecting layers of identity, reputation, connection, belief. I was taught to hold on, to protect, to preserve. Letting go, in the world I came from, was seen as weakness, as failure. We were told to keep moving forward, always forward, even if the weight of what we carried made that movement hollow. And so I clung to people, to habits, to ways of being that had long outlived their season in my soul. I kept relationships alive long after their truth had withered, wore masks that no longer fit, recited stories about myself that had grown stale, brittle, false. And yet the forest shows me something else entirely. There is no fear in its surrender, no hesitation in its release. The trees do not cling to the old leaves in hopes of preserving summer. They let them go without ceremony, without grief. They stand tall in their shedding, exposed, vulnerable, honest. And in that bareness, they are beautiful. There is a kind of courage in that, the courage to be seen without adornment, to be known without disguise. I wonder what it would be like to live that way, to drop what no longer serves me without needing to justify it, to mourn it, to hold on to it in secret. What would it be like to let go not as an act of desperation, but as a gesture of trust? I come upon a small clearing where the light spills down through the open canopy like liquid gold. In the center stands a birch tree, slender and pale, its bark like old parchment peeling gently at the edges. Its branches are nearly bare, only a few stubborn leaves clinging to the tips, glowing amber in the sunlight. I sit across from it, crossing my legs and settling into the stillness. I watch as a breeze moves through the clearing, lifting one of the leaves, holding it in a trembling pause, and then, gently, it lets go. The leaf spins once, twice, then floats downward and lands near my foot. I reach out and pick it up. It is delicate, veined with age, but beautiful in its final stage. I turn it over in my hand, studying the patterns, the imperfections, the small tears that time has etched into it. It reminds me of the parts of myself I have tried to hide, the regrets, the losses, the versions of me that I buried because they no longer matched who I thought I needed to be. But in the leaf, I see no shame. I see the end of one cycle, not the failure of a life. I realize then how much I have feared my own seasons, how often I have tried to remain in bloom when my soul was aching to rest, to release, to be bare. I think of a friend I once loved deeply, someone who held space for my silences, who saw the hidden places I dared not name. Our connection was like a flame, bright, fleeting, illuminating things in me I had forgotten. But as time passed, something shifted. Not in anger, not in betrayal, but in rhythm. We began to move to different tempos, caught in different winds. Still, I held on. I reached back through letters, through old poems, through memories that became more ideal than real. I feared letting go would make it meaningless. But the forest reminds me, letting go is not forgetting. It is remembering differently. It is remembering with peace instead of ache. And so I sit with the leaf, and I speak to that memory, to that love. I thank it. I bless it. And then I set the leaf down beside me and let it be what it was always meant to be, part of the earth again. Not lost. Not discarded. Transformed. As I rise and begin to walk again, I feel a softness in my chest, a space that was once crowded by all the things I tried to preserve. I feel a quiet in my thoughts, a stillness that is not emptiness, but presence. Around me, the wind continues its sacred work, shaking loose the remnants of summer, preparing the forest for rest. I feel it moving through me too, loosening the last brittle clings of my heart. I welcome it. I trust it. There is a season for every part of our becoming. A time for holding and a time for releasing. A time for speaking and a time for silence. A time to stand tall in bloom and a time to stand tall in bare surrender. The forest knows this. The trees have always known. And now, slowly, I am learning too. To live fully is to participate in the dance of shedding and becoming. To love deeply is to let go when the moment arrives. And to be like the tree is to understand that even in bareness, we are not broken, we are simply preparing to bloom again. So I walk on, my steps light, the sun on my face, the wind at my back. And in every falling leaf, I hear the same truth echo again and again. Let it fall. Let it go. Let yourself be free. I return to the grove on a morning heavy with mist, the kind of morning where the world feels wrapped in a silken shroud, softened and hushed, as if it were still lingering in the delicate space between sleep and wakefulness. The dampness clung to the leaves and the earth beneath my feet, muting the usual sounds of the forest into a gentle murmur, barely audible but deeply present. The trees stood like quiet sentinels, their branches reaching upward through the fog, half revealed and half concealed, mysterious and eternal. I breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs and seep into the very core of my being. I had come not with questions or demands, but simply with an openness to whatever this morning had to offer. Around me, the grove was shedding its summer finery. Leaves that had once blazed green and vibrant were now turning soft hues of ochre, amber, and russet, ready to fall when the wind whispered its invitation. The branches, once lush and full, were becoming barer with each passing day, revealing the elegant architecture of the trees themselves. I marveled at this unfolding, the natural cycle of release and renewal playing out with such grace and inevitability. The trees did not cling. They did not fight the changing of the season. They did not mourn their loss with bitterness or regret. Instead, they surrendered with a quiet dignity, offering their leaves to the earth as gifts, nourishing the soil that would sustain them through the coming cold and beyond. I found myself drawn to the birch tree I had visited before, its pale bark standing out against the dark earth and the deeper greens of the surrounding evergreens. Its surface was delicate and fragile in the damp air, peeling in thin, curling layers like a fragile manuscript worn by time. I sat down at its base, legs folded beneath me, and allowed myself to become still, to listen not with my ears but with the deep attentiveness of presence. The forest around me breathed in a rhythm I could feel in my bones, slow, steady, patient. In this stillness, a memory surfaced, not harsh or jarring, but soft and worn like a favorite cloak. It was a younger version of myself, full of ambition and hunger, chasing after the world's approval with eager hands and a restless heart. I remembered the way I sought to be many things at once, the wise teacher, the beloved poet, the spiritual guide. I chased every role with fervor, thinking that to be whole I needed to be all these things simultaneously. I wore these identities like armor, shielding my vulnerabilities, hoping that the masks I crafted would protect me from the fear of being seen as insufficient or incomplete. But beneath those roles, beneath the careful construction, was a fragile self who feared disappearance, who trembled at the thought of being unmoored and alone. I carried that fear quietly, allowing it to shape my actions and words, binding myself to expectations both my own and those of others. Beside me, the birch stood steadfast, its bare branches reaching upward with a quiet resolve. It had once been young too, stretching eagerly toward the sun, eager to grow and expand. But over time, it had learned a different kind of strength, a strength found not in clinging, but in releasing. It had surrendered its leaves when their season ended, allowing the wind to carry them away without resistance or complaint. Through this gentle letting go, it had grown stronger, more rooted, more real. I closed my eyes and inhaled the mingled sense of wet earth and decaying leaves, a perfume of endings and beginnings. This scent awakened within me a longing to shed the many versions of myself I had carried for so long, versions that no longer fit the man I was becoming. I began to name them silently, tenderly, the version who needed to always be right, the version who feared loneliness so deeply it clung to every fleeting connection, the version who believed love was something to hold tightly lest it slip away. I honored each of these selves for the role they had played in my journey, for the lessons they had taught me and the growth they had sparked. And then, one by one, I imagined setting them down like leaves falling to the forest floor, softly, reverently, without shame. As the mist began to lift and the sun pierced through the canopy, scattering light like 1,000 tiny blessings, I felt a remarkable lightness within me. The weight of those old identities, the burdens of fear and expectation, began to dissolve, melting away into the fertile soil of my heart. I understood then that letting go is not a violent severing, but a sacred unburdening, a conscious choice to trust the unfolding of life, to make space for what is yet to come. Just as the tree's bare branches promise the renewal of spring, so too did this release hold the promise of my own renewal. Rising from the ground, I felt taller, not because I had grown outward, but because I had expanded inward. The wind, now stronger and more insistent, moved through the grove, stirring the leaves and the branches, urging them to dance and fall. I welcomed its touch, allowing it to move through me as well, loosening the last tight knots of resistance. With each breath, I became more aligned with the rhythm of the trees, the quiet wisdom of their cycles, their patient surrender. As I walked back toward the edge of the forest, the phrase came to me, not as a distant teaching, but as a lived truth, warm and immediate in my bones. Be like a tree and let the dead leaves drop. It was no longer just a metaphor, but a guide for my being, a call to embrace vulnerability, to release what no longer serves, and to trust in the sacred cycle of life and growth. The trees had shown me that strength lies not in holding fast, but in the grace of letting go, season after season, leaf by leaf. With a heart softened and a spirit unburdened, I stepped into the sunlight, carrying with me the forest's quiet song. Surrender, release, renewal. And I knew that as surely as the trees would bloom again, so too would I. The wind that day was unlike any I had ever known, both tender and persistent, weaving through the branches like a gentle call from the unseen, stirring the very essence of the grove and awakening parts of myself I had long neglected. It whispered secrets in the rustling of leaves, a language older than words, spoken by the trees in their silent vigil through countless seasons. Standing there, I closed my eyes and felt the breath of the world around me merge with the breath within me. Each gust seemed to carry away the dust of old sorrows and the weight of forgotten grievances, unbinding the tight knots of resistance I had wrapped around my heart. In the presence of the ancient oaks, their vast branches stripped bare by the inevitable passage of time, I found myself humbled by their steadfastness. They bore the loss of their leaves without complaint or sorrow, embracing the necessary pain of shedding as part of a larger, sacred process. To me, this was not a mere act of nature, but a profound metaphor for life itself. How often had I clung to my own dead leaves, those memories, regrets, and identities that no longer serve my growth, believing them to be inseparable parts of my being. Yet the trees showed me another way. Strength is not in holding on, but in the courage to let go. As the wind rose and fell, carrying with it a carpet of golden and crimson leaves, I was transported back to years when I was burdened by the invisible chains of fear, resentment, and loss. Those years when my heart held tightly to pain, unwilling to surrender, as if releasing those burdens meant erasing the very proof of my existence. I had mistaken attachment for love, possession for devotion, and resistance for strength. But the trees, with their silent wisdom, teach a different truth, one of surrender and trust in the cycles of life. In the quiet of the grove, I began to practice this sacred letting go. I breathed deeply, envisioning the dead leaves I carried within, the grudges that gnawed at my peace, the fears that kept me small, the false narratives that no longer fit my truth. One by one, like leaves caught in the autumn wind, I imagined releasing them from my grasp. Each exhale carried away a fragment of my burden. Each inhalation welcomed a space for renewal. The tightness in my chest softened, the ache in my throat dissolved into a gentle openness. The image of the trees grounded me. They do not fear the bareness that comes with loss. Their roots run deep beneath the earth, anchoring them through storms and frost. They endure the harshness of winter not by resisting it, but by embracing it as a necessary passage toward new life. So too, I realized, could I stand firm in my essence even as I shed the parts of myself weighed down by time and pain. I could endure the winters of my soul with patience and faith, knowing that spring's promise would return. As the wind swept through the grove, swirling leaves into graceful dances, I opened my eyes to catch a single leaf descending slowly through the crisp air. Its veins were delicate, its edges curled with the artistry of age and endurance. I reached out and cradled it gently, feeling in its fragile form the beauty and wisdom of the cycle I was learning to embrace. Holding it, I whispered a prayer, not for forgetting, but for the grace to remember life's impermanence and the courage to flow with it. Releasing the leaf to the earth, I felt a wave of peace settle within me, deep and abiding. Letting go, I understood, is not erasing or forgetting. It is honoring the past while making space for the future. It is surrendering to the flow of life with open hands and a trusting heart. The trees have taught me this lesson without words, through their quiet example, their patient shedding, and their steadfast presence. Turning from the grove, my steps felt lighter, freer than before. The wind wrapped around me like an old friend, carrying whispers of hope, renewal, and transformation. I carried with me the wisdom of the trees, to be like them, to stand tall and strong through every season, and to let the dead leaves drop, so that I might, in time, bloom again with new life, new light, and renewed purpose. The mornings had grown colder now, the air crisp and sharp as if the very breath of the earth was turning toward winter's embrace. I found myself drawn once again to the grove, seeking its quiet wisdom as the world shifted beneath the weight of changing seasons. The frost coated the leaves and branches like a delicate veil of crystal, sparkling in the soft, pale light of dawn. With each step I took, the frost crunched softly beneath my feet, a gentle reminder of the passage of time and the inevitability of transformation. The trees stood tall and bare, their skeletal limbs etched against the pale sky, bearing the scars and stories of many cycles past. Their presence was both humbling and comforting, a testament to endurance, to the power of stillness amid change. As I wandered deeper into the grove, my eyes were drawn to a cluster of young saplings, fragile and new, their slender trunks swaying lightly in the chilly breeze. Unlike the ancient oaks and elms around them, they still clung to their leaves, vibrant streaks of amber and crimson in the muted palette of late autumn. I approached one gently, placing my hand on its bark and feeling the faint pulse of life beneath my palm. It was as if the tree was holding on to its last treasures, reluctant to surrender, yet preparing itself for the inevitable. In that moment, I understood that the process of letting go is not merely about release, but about creating sacred space, space for renewal, for growth, for the unfolding of what has yet to be. This truth resonated deeply within me. I reflected on the times in my life when I, too, had resisted the natural flow of change, clutching desperately at familiar comforts, identities, and beliefs that had long ceased to nurture my spirit. How many times had I feared the unknown so fiercely that I chained myself to the past, imprisoning my own potential? Yet, here in the stillness of the forest, the saplings taught me otherwise. Growth requires surrender. It demands a quiet courage, the courage not to battle the storm, but to bend with the wind, to trust the unseen hands that guide transformation. A sudden gust swept through the grove, shaking loose a handful of leaves from the sapling's branches. I watched them spiral downward, their descent slow and deliberate, as if each leaf was offering a final blessing to the earth before resting. There was no resistance in their fall, no struggle to cling. They moved with grace and acceptance, embodying a wisdom I longed to embody myself. The leaves reminded me of the parts of my heart I had long held tightly, old wounds, regrets, illusions that were now ready to be released. Yet, trust did not come easily. I feared that letting go might leave me hollow, exposed, diminished. But the trees stood as living proof that bareness can be beautiful, that vulnerability is strength, that surrender is the gateway to renewal. I settled beneath the ancient elm, its branches now stark against the pale sky, and closed my eyes. The stillness enveloped me like a gentle embrace, inviting me to dive inward. Memories surfaced softly, faces of those I had loved and lost, moments of laughter and tears, mistakes that had once felt like chains but now appeared as lessons etched in the contours of my soul. These memories, I realized, were like leaves too, some brilliant and alive, others faded and brittle. For years, I had carried them all indiscriminately, fearing that releasing any part would mean losing the essence of who I was. But now, through the example of the trees, I understood that love and memory do not demand possession. They flourish in the lightness of release. I breathed deeply, envisioning my heart as a grand tree, its roots plunging deep into the soil of existence, its branches wide and reaching. I imagined the leaves of my past, fears, attachments, false identities, detaching gently and drifting away on the breeze. Each leaf that fell left behind a space, an opening in my soul that was neither empty nor barren but pregnant with possibility. These spaces were invitations to new growth, new stories, new love. A profound peace settled over me as I embraced this vision, feeling myself rooted in the eternal dance of death and rebirth that the trees embody so effortlessly. As the sun rose higher, casting golden shafts of light through the thinning canopy, I rose from the earth, feeling the strength and flexibility coursing through my own body. The lessons of the grove had seeped deep into my being, to be like the trees, to stand tall and grounded even in nakedness, to shed what no longer serves with grace and trust, to find courage in the act of surrender. I knew the path ahead was one of continual shedding, of falling and rising again, leaf by leaf, breath by breath. Walking back toward the edge of the forest, the wind followed me, a steady companion whispering promises of renewal and transformation. I carried the tree's ancient wisdom like a sacred flame within my chest, its warmth both comforting and fierce. I was no longer afraid of loss or change. I was ready to fall with dignity, to release with love, and to rise renewed, stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than ever before. The forest had settled into a profound stillness as twilight deepened, the soft hues of fading light filtering through the skeletal branches above. The ground beneath my feet was thick with a carpet of fallen leaves, each one crinkled and curled, whispering their own quiet stories as they settled into the earth. The air was cool and carried the faint, sweet scent of moss and damp wood, mingled with the subtle aroma of decay, a fragrance both humbling and sacred, reminding me of the eternal cycle of life and death, growth and release. As I moved slowly through the grove, I felt as though I were walking inside a living meditation, each breath and step drawing me deeper into a space of quiet reflection and surrender. The bareness of the trees had taken on a new meaning for me. No longer did I see their stripped branches as empty or desolate. Instead, they seemed to embody a profound vulnerability, a nakedness so pure that it revealed the very essence of their being. This nakedness was not weakness, but strength. It was a testament to their willingness to stand tall and true, without artifice or disguise. I realized that this same courage was being called forth within me, the courage to stand exposed, to reveal my own bare branches to the world, and to be seen in the fullness of my authentic self, scars and all. As my feet crunched softly against the leaf-strewn earth, my thoughts turned inward. I contemplated the many layers I had shed, old fears that had once loomed large and forbidding, doubts that had clouded my path, identities that no longer fit the man I was becoming. And yet, I acknowledged with tenderness the parts of me that still clung to the past, the regrets, the resentments, the silent stories I told myself to justify holding on. Surrender, I knew, was not a single act but a lifelong practice, an unfolding process as intricate and delicate as the changing seasons themselves. Each leaf that fell was a metaphor for a part of my soul released, making room for the unknown gifts yet to come. I stopped before a towering sycamore, its wide trunk marked by deep grooves and ancient scars that told of storms weathered and time endured. I pressed my hand to its bark, rough and worn despite the chill in the air, and felt the steady pulse of life beneath. In that moment, I saw the tree's resilience, not in spite of its wounds, but because of them. The scars were not signs of brokenness, but of survival and growth. This truth struck me deeply. I had spent years hiding my own scars, believing they made me lesser, flawed, or unworthy. But here was the living proof that our wounds are sacred gateways, places where light and transformation enter, where new growth is born from old pain. Settling at the base of the sycamore, I closed my eyes and allowed the stillness to settle around me like a sacred cloak. Memories rose like mist, faces of those I had loved and lost, moments of joy mingled with sorrow, mistakes that had once haunted me now softened by the passage of time. I held each memory tenderly, no longer resisting their presence or fearing their weight. Instead, I welcomed them as beloved teachers, integral parts of the tapestry of my life, woven into the very soil from which my spirit grows. Letting go, I realized, was not rejecting or forgetting, but embracing the fullness of my journey with open arms and an open heart. My mind wandered to the relationships that had shaped me, friendships that had blossomed and faded, loves that had ignited brightly and then quietly slipped away. I remembered the desperation I once felt to hold tightly, fearing that release meant abandonment, erasure, or loss of meaning. But the trees whispered a gentler truth: love is not possession. True love is freedom. To love deeply is to allow space for growth and change, to trust that what is genuine will endure beyond presence and absence. In this, I found a profound liberation, the grace to let go without losing the love itself. A soft breeze stirred the fallen leaves around me, lifting them in delicate spirals before laying them gently back upon the earth. Their dance was effortless, a quiet surrender to the unseen rhythms that govern all life. Watching their graceful descent, I felt my heart open wider, blooming beyond the confines of fear, grief, and resistance. I embraced the vulnerability that comes with surrender, recognizing it as the gateway to true strength and freedom. As dusk deepened and the forest shadows lengthened, I rose and began to walk back toward the edges of the grove. Each step felt lighter, buoyed by the deep knowing that comes from living fully and embracing the cycles of becoming. The trees had taught me that wholeness is not found in perfection or permanence, but in the willingness to stand bare, to release what no longer serves, and to trust the unfolding mystery of life's eternal dance. Carrying their quiet wisdom within me, I stepped into the fading light, ready to face whatever seasons awaited with an open heart and steady roots. I was becoming like the tree, strong in my vulnerability, honest in my bareness, and free in the sacred art of letting the dead leaves fall. The sky was a vast canvas painted with delicate shades of pink and purple as evening slowly wrapped the grove in its soft embrace. The fading light spilled like liquid silk over the world, smoothing edges and quieting the noise of day. Around me, the trees stood in solemn procession, their branches stripped bare yet reaching skyward with a silent dignity, their silhouettes etched against the deepening twilight like ancient sentinels guarding the sacred rhythm of life and death. In this sacred space, I felt the weight of the day's reflection settle deep within my chest, each breath a meditation on surrender, transformation, and the profound mystery of renewal. The forest was no longer merely a physical place beneath the sky. It had become a living mirror of my own soul, exposing the intricate dance between clinging and releasing, between holding tight and letting go. I traced the long and winding journey that had led me to this moment, a pilgrimage through seasons of resistance and acceptance, of fierce attachments and gentle relinquishments. Each leaf that had fallen from these noble trees was a testament to the courage required to face the inevitability of change, to embrace vulnerability with open arms, and to trust the invisible currents that move through all existence. I realized that this process was far from linear or tidy. It was, instead, a beautiful chaos, a weaving of endings and beginnings, a perpetual unfolding of the self that shaped the very essence of who I am. I saw clearly now that growth was born not only from what is held, but also from what is released. Beneath my feet lay a thick, rich carpet of leaves, twigs, and bark, mingled together in a tapestry of decay and regeneration. I knelt, pressing my fingers into the damp earth, and felt the hidden pulse of life beneath the surface, a fertile darkness where endings gave birth to new beginnings. It struck me then that this soil, nourished by the fallen and the forgotten, was the foundation upon which all future growth depends. In the same way, I must learn to allow the parts of myself that have ended, old dreams, lost loves, faded identities, to return to the earth of my being, providing the rich compost from which new hopes and new forms can arise. This sacred cycle of surrender and renewal is not loss, but transformation. As I rose, the night deepened, and the sky was punctured by countless stars, each one a spark of infinite possibility twinkling in the vast darkness. The immensity of the heavens reminded me of the boundless opportunities that emerge when we release our grip on the familiar and open ourselves to the unknown. Gratitude swelled within me for the tree's patient, unwavering presence through storms and stillness, for their silent teachings etched in bark and branch, for their profound lesson that to grow fully, we must first learn to let go. This lesson now throbbed in my heartbeat and breathed in the quiet spaces between my thoughts and breaths, a living pulse of wisdom guiding me forward. I understood more deeply than ever that letting go is not a gesture of loss or emptiness, but a sacred act of faith, a dance with the unknown that demands trust and courage. The dead leaves, though fallen, do not disappear into oblivion. They become part of the earth, enriching it and nurturing the tender shoots that will rise in time. So too must I honor the many versions of myself that have passed, the loves, the lessons, the pains, and allow them to nourish the fertile soil of my soul, making way for the self yet to be born. Pausing beneath a tall, solitary pine, its dark needles shimmering faintly in the moonlight, I placed my palm against its rough bark and felt the steady thrum of life pulsing beneath my touch. In that moment, I was deeply connected to the endless flow of being, a continuum of existence that transcends time and form, loss and gain, life and death. The trees had shown me how to stand with grace amid change, how to release with love, how to trust the sacred cycle of falling and rising, dying and blossoming. As I walked away from the grove, the cool night air wrapped around me like a gentle cloak, carrying whispers of promise and renewal. My steps felt lighter, freer, as if the shedding of old leaves within my heart had opened new pathways to the horizon. The ancient wisdom of the trees, "Be like a tree and let the dead leaves drop," was no longer a distant metaphor or a poetic ideal, but a living truth inscribed deep within my soul. With this truth held firmly in my heart, I stepped forward into the embrace of the unknown, ready to bloom again, to grow anew, to become the fullest expression of myself. The first light of dawn seeped softly through the bare branches above, bathing the forest floor in a gentle golden hue that shimmered with quiet promise. The grove, now stripped of its once vibrant summer cloak and the fiery blaze of autumn, rested in a peaceful stillness, a sacred pause between what had been and what was yet to come. I stood among the trees, feeling the cool, damp earth beneath my feet, the steady heartbeat of the soil pulsing through the trunks around me. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of moss and earth, a subtle reminder of life's enduring cycle of death and rebirth. In this moment, suspended between night and day, I found myself at a threshold, not just of the forest seasons, but of my own inner transformation, ready to fully embrace what it means to live, to let go, and to grow anew. As I breathed in the serene stillness, my thoughts traveled back over the winding path I had walked, a journey marked by the gradual, sometimes painful shedding of old skins, the courageous release of fears, regrets, attachments, and identities that had once defined me but had since become chains. Each fallen leaf on the ground was like a fragment of my past, once vital, now spent, returning to the earth to nourish what would come next. Yet, despite their departure, I felt no emptiness, only liberation. The trees had whispered to me through the seasons that letting go is not surrendering to loss, but stepping boldly into the flow of life's endless renewal. They taught me that the strength of their towering trunks came not from holding on to every leaf, but from the grace with which they allowed each one to fall, trusting the promise of spring's return. Moving slowly through the grove, the gentle crunch of dry leaves beneath my feet became a sacred rhythm, a meditative heartbeat that connected me deeply to the earth and to the timeless cycles around me. The stark beauty of the leafless trees revealed a profound truth: resilience is not always loud or visible. Sometimes, it is found in the quiet patience of waiting, in the invisible work of roots growing deeper and life preparing beneath the surface. Growth, I realized, often happens in the unseen spaces within us, in the shadowed moments of solitude and surrender where transformation takes root before any outward bloom. I found myself drawn to a venerable walnut tree, its broad, gnarled branches stretching wide like the arms of an ancient guardian. Settling against its sturdy trunk, I let the peace of the grove wash over me like a balm for my weary soul. Memories surfaced, some joyous and radiant, others shadowed with loss and longing. I cradled each one gently in my heart, recognizing that all these moments, light and dark, were threads woven into the rich tapestry of my life. To clutch any single thread too tightly would unravel the whole. Instead, I embraced the fluidity of change, allowing myself to flow with the shifting patterns of existence, honoring both the brightness and the shadows within me. A soft breeze stirred the fallen leaves at my feet, lifting them in delicate swirls before settling them again onto the earth. It carried a whispered promise of new beginnings, a subtle invitation to trust the unfolding mystery ahead. Looking up through the skeletal branches toward the awakening sky, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the quiet teachers of the forest, the trees whose silent endurance and sacred cycles had shown me the path of resilience, surrender, and renewal. I understood now that to be like a tree is to live fully in harmony with life's rhythms, to stand rooted and strong amid loss, to release with grace and love, and to embrace the unknown with open arms. As the sun climbed higher, pouring warm, golden light across the grove, I rose from my resting place feeling a profound shift within. The old leaves had fallen, the past had been laid gently to rest, and in this sacred moment of stillness, I was free to grow, to reach, to bloom in my own time and way. With roots planted deeply in the fertile soil of experience and branches lifted toward the boundless sky, I stepped forward into the new day carrying the ancient wisdom of the trees within me. Ready to live fully, to love deeply, and to dance unafraid in the endless cycles of life, I moved forward with an open heart, ready to bloom again, to become more fully myself, and to trust the sacred journey unfolding before me.
you.